I've always thought of myself as a decent guy. Someone who did what needed to be done, stayed on the straight and narrow, and didn't let life's curveballs knock me down. It felt like I had everything: a solid career, a nice house in a good neighborhood, and most of all, my wife, Linda. Linda was the kind of woman who turned heads without even trying. Smart, funny, and someone who never made me doubt that I'd hit the jackpot marrying her. For the past few years, work had been intense. My company was on an aggressive growth streak, and it meant a lot of traveling. Conferences, client meetings, on-site visits. My life was a plane ride in a hotel room every other week. But I wasn't worried about Linda. She always assured me she was fine, encouraged me to pursue these opportunities, and promised she'd be here when I got back. But even if I trusted her, I couldn't ignore that my frequent absences took a toll on her. She was a little too quiet every time I packed my bags. So, when I had to fly out for an extended conference across the country, I decided to ask my brother, Mark, to stay at our place. It seemed like the perfect solution. Mark was my best friend, the guy who knew everything about me and had been there through every one of my ups and downs. I figured his presence would make Linda feel safer, and the thought of them keeping each other company put me at ease. The day before I left, I had dinner with Mark and laid it all out for him. "Look, man, I'm going to be gone for a while, and I just don't feel good about leaving her alone for that long. Would you mind crashing at our place? I'll cover anything you need. Just make sure she's all right." Mark grinned, a beer halfway to his lips. "Say no more, bro. I'll be the perfect houseguest. You've got my word." The night I left, Linda gave me a kiss that lingered longer than usual, her eyes a little too bright, maybe even a little sad. I chalked it up to the fact that we'd be apart for so long. "You take care of yourself," she whispered. "And make sure to call me." "I will," I said, running my hand through her hair. "Mark's got you covered, so don't you worry." And just like that, I was on my way. The conference started out as expected, filled with meetings, presentations, and long nights. It was intense, but it was good for my career, and I thought about the promotions and bonuses that would eventually make this all worth it. I called Linda every night, and each time, she sounded a little more distant, but I shrugged it off. Traveling was hard on both of us, and I figured Mark's presence would help break the monotony of those lonely days and nights. It was about halfway through the conference when I got a call from one of my colleagues. The news was surprising. The event would be wrapping up 2 days early due to some unexpected cancellations. I was thrilled. I'd get to go home sooner than expected, surprise Linda, and finally relax. So I packed my things and headed to the airport, keeping the whole thing a secret. The idea of surprising her, showing up unannounced, brought a smile to my face. I pictured her surprise, how she'd probably yell at me for not telling her, how she'd throw her arms around me. After a long, late flight, I pulled up to the house around midnight. I was exhausted but thrilled to be home. The lights in the living room were off, but I could see a faint glow coming from upstairs. I figured Linda had left the lamp on, maybe fallen asleep reading. Quietly, I unlocked the door, slipping in and setting down my bags, eager to finally be home. But as I started up the stairs, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. The house was still, almost too still, with a kind of tension hanging in the air. I dismissed the thought, chalking it up to my overworked imagination. After all, I'd been away for nearly 2 weeks. Things just felt different. At the top of the stairs, I turned towards the bedroom. That's when I saw the faint light coming from under the door. I pushed the door open, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't understand. And that's when I saw them. Linda, lying there, wrapped around someone, my brother, Mark. Both of them asleep in our bed, our sheets tangled around them, looking for all the world like they belonged there. It felt like the ground was pulled from under me. The air seemed to freeze, and all I could do was stand there, my mind numb, my heart pounding so loud it felt like it would burst. A cold realization washed over me, paralyzing me. I took a breath, held it, and stepped back, closing the door quietly. I didn't want to wake them. Not yet. I backed out of the room, shutting the door slowly as if closing it would somehow make everything I'd seen disappear. My mind felt shattered, pieces scattering in every direction, yet I didn't make a sound. Part of me didn't believe it, couldn't believe it, but there was no unseeing that image, the betrayal so clear and absolute. For a few minutes, I just stood there in the dark hallway, my mind racing. My first thought was to storm in, to scream, to drag Mark out of my bed, but the shock kept me rooted to the spot. And then I thought about how carefully I'd planned my arrival, the anticipation I'd felt on the flight home, the relief at seeing my own front door. All of it twisted, poisoned. In seconds, my life had gone from something stable to a pile of debris I didn't know how to sift through. Slowly, I walked back down the stairs, each step feeling like it echoed in an empty void. I couldn't stay here, not tonight, not with them in my bed. So I grabbed my bag, slipped out the front door, and got back in my car. The street was eerily quiet, the glow of the streetlights casting long shadows. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I couldn't be there, not now. I just needed to think. I drove for hours, my mind a blur of anger and disbelief. The reality of it felt like a knife in my chest. Linda, the woman I'd trusted completely, and Mark, the brother I would have given my life for, had torn apart the only solid thing I thought I had. A sick feeling washed over me as I pictured them together in the place we'd built, like they'd stripped me of everything I was without a second thought. Eventually, I ended up in the parking lot of a diner. The neon sign buzzed in the night, but inside, it was quiet. I ordered a coffee, watching the steam curl from the cup as I tried to pull myself together. After a few sips, I started to think about my options. I could confront them directly, blow up my entire life right here and now, but something in me hesitated. This wasn't the way I wanted it to go down. I needed more than just a scene. I needed to understand how long this had been going on. I wanted answers, a sense of control over the narrative they'd stolen from me. And if I could, I wanted to make them pay. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through Linda's texts. I'd never been the type to go through her messages, but that was over. In my gut, I knew there had to be something there, some clue I'd overlooked. Sure enough, there were messages from Mark. Most of them looked harmless on the surface, full of casual updates. But as I read, the hidden meanings started to jump out. "Can't wait to see you tonight," was one. Or, "I'll be there at 8, don't worry." Nothing explicit, nothing you could call damning, but I wasn't an idiot. My own brother had been sneaking into my home with my wife, and they'd thought they could keep it hidden. I could feel the rage building stronger now, coursing through me like a live wire. I wasn't going to confront them blindly. I'd make sure everything was in place, every detail set so that they'd never see it coming. Over the next few days, I worked like a man possessed. I returned to the house while Linda was at work, going through every corner, every scrap of evidence they might have left behind. At one point, I found an earring on the bedside table. It was Linda's, but I knew she'd never wear it there. She wasn't that careless. This had to be Mark's doing, his confidence growing over time. They both thought I was safely out of the picture. I went to my office and took advantage of the time away from them to devise a plan. I wanted them to feel the full weight of what they'd done. Every detail, every move had to be perfect. In my line of work, I'd learned that the best way to deal with a problem was to dissect it piece by piece, analyzing it from every angle before making a move. This was no different. I started by installing a few cameras in the house. I'd make sure they were hidden, covering the places they'd probably meet. Then I called up a friend in security systems to get some advice on motion-activated recording. He was all too happy to help, blissfully unaware of the real reason I wanted this setup. In the evenings, I pretended everything was normal, calling Linda like I was still out of town, acting as though I was none the wiser. She seemed so genuine on the phone, her voice warm, telling me she missed me. She'd ask about my day, telling me about hers, and all the while, I had to grit my teeth and play along. If it weren't for the video footage I now had, maybe I'd have let myself believe she was innocent. But no amount of sweet talk could erase what I'd seen. After setting up the cameras, I sat down and thought about how I'd present the evidence. This wasn't going to be a simple confrontation. It had to be memorable, something they'd never forget. I'd make sure they knew exactly who they were dealing with. They'd gone behind my back, but now I was the one with the upper hand. I decided to give them one more chance. I wanted to see if, in their minds, they'd done something wrong, if they'd show any remorse at all. So I arranged to come home a bit earlier than I'd planned, calling Linda to let her know the conference had wrapped up early. Her reaction was the final nail in the coffin. She sounded surprised but covered it quickly, her voice a little too bright. "Oh, really? That's wonderful, honey. I'll have dinner ready when you get home." The lies rolled off her tongue with ease. She was a professional at this point. It was all I could do not to confront her right then, but I bit back the words. "No, not yet. Not until I had them exactly where I wanted them." The night before I returned, I reviewed the footage on my phone. I'd set up a camera in the living room, and sure enough, there they were, Mark and Linda, on my couch, laughing, sitting a little too close. Linda leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, looking like a woman in love. My heart pounded as I watched, each second stretching painfully. I couldn't decide if it hurt more to see them laughing together, as though I didn't exist, or if it was their complete disregard for my place, my life. It was like they'd written me off, already moved on. But if that's what they wanted, I'd let them live in their little fantasy for just a while longer. Soon, they'd come crashing back to reality. And I'd be there, ready to watch them fall. The next day, I came home with all the calm of a man stepping into a place he once loved but now barely recognized. My house, the walls, the smell of it, it all felt tainted. I barely recognized the life I'd built, everything now a fragile facade about to shatter. Linda was in the kitchen when I walked in, and the look on her face when she saw me was almost worth it. She forced a smile, wide and welcoming, but her eyes flashed with something else, nervousness, maybe even guilt. She rushed over, arms open, the perfect wife thrilled to have her husband back home. "Welcome back," she said, hugging me tightly. "You have no idea how much I missed you." Her voice was sweet, her arms warm around me, and for a second, I wanted to believe her. But the image of her and Mark tangled together was seared into my mind, making it impossible to feel anything other than cold. I forced myself to smile and play along, holding her just long enough that she wouldn't suspect a thing. If she could lie so easily, so could I. "Miss you too, babe," I said, forcing the words out as I let her go. "It's good to be home." Over dinner, I watched her carefully. She'd made my favorite, some attempt at a welcome home celebration, and I noticed every detail, every move. She was calm, collected, like there was nothing she'd rather do than sit across the table from me. I wondered how many times they'd eaten together like this in my absence, laughing, sharing moments in the life she was supposed to build with me. "How was the trip?" she asked, her eyes shining with interest. She was playing her part well, too well. "It went well," I said, choosing each word carefully. "Learned a lot, met a few important people. Had a lot of late nights." I looked up, holding her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. "What about you? Did you stay busy?" I saw her hesitate for just a second, a flicker in her eyes. She wasn't expecting me to turn the conversation back to her, but she recovered quickly, flashing a reassuring smile. "Oh, nothing exciting," she replied smoothly. "You know how it is around here. Same old routine." The word stung. Same old routine. She was lying to my face, and all I could do was nod and keep the conversation moving. Part of me wanted to tear into her, to confront her right then and there, but that wasn't the plan. No, the plan was to get them both exactly where I wanted them. So I kept up the charade, acting as if everything was normal. I told Linda I was exhausted and went to bed early, lying awake in the dark, replaying the evidence I'd collected over and over again in my mind. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to make sure they knew they'd never see it coming. The next morning, I got up early and went to see Mark. I told Linda I needed to run some errands and slipped out of the house before she could offer to come along. It felt strange, almost surreal, driving to his apartment like I was heading to meet an old friend. as if everything was normal. But the anger in my chest kept me focused, kept my thoughts razor sharp. Mark was surprised to see me when he opened the door, but he played it cool, greeting me with a friendly grin as he stepped back to let me in. "Long time no see, bro," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "How was the trip?" "Oh, same as usual," I replied, watching him closely. "Nothing you'd be interested in." We sat down, and I waited for the right moment to bring up what I'd come here for. Mark was acting like nothing was wrong, casual and relaxed, laughing, sharing stories about work, friends, and the usual nonsense. I watched him, my mind swimming with memories of the times we'd spent together, the loyalty I'd felt for him. I'd never once doubted him, and here he was, acting as though he hadn't stolen my entire life. Finally, I leaned back in my chair studying him. I started, my voice casual. "Linda told me you stopped by a few times while I was away. Really helped her out. I appreciate it." His face didn't change, but I noticed a slight twitch in his eyes, a barely there flash of something. Guilt? Fear? It was gone in an instant, replaced by a shrug as he took a sip of his drink. "Of course, man," he replied, looking completely at ease. "Linda's practically family. I just wanted to make sure she wasn't lonely while you were out." I nodded, my mind already racing with the possibilities. He wasn't even trying to hide it. They'd gotten so comfortable with the lies, so arrogant, that they didn't think I'd ever catch on. It was almost laughable. As I got up to leave, I turned to him, my hand on the doorknob. "Hey, why don't you come over for dinner sometime this week? Linda's been missing you. It'll be like old times." Mark grinned, slapping me on the back. "Sounds good, bro. Just let me know when." On the way back home, I finalized the details in my mind. I'd set the stage, just like I'd planned. They wouldn't see it coming. And when the truth finally hit them, they'd know just how deep their betrayal had cut. The following evening, I arranged for the dinner. I told Linda I wanted to have Mark over, that it'd be nice to spend some time with him. She hesitated for a moment, but then she agreed, going to great lengths to prepare a meal that looked like something out of a magazine. I could see how nervous she was, the way she kept glancing at the clock, adjusting the plates, checking her reflection in the silverware. I wondered if she thought I'd somehow suspect something, if she thought Mark would give it all away. When Mark arrived, Linda's face lit up, a smile spreading across her lips as she hugged him, and it took every ounce of restraint to keep myself calm. The two of them sat across from me, laughing, sharing stories, acting as though I wasn't there. It was surreal, watching them together, their connection so obvious it felt like a slap in the face. I bided my time, letting them enjoy themselves, letting them think they'd won. But then, as Linda got up to clear the dishes, I took out my phone and tapped the screen. The television blinked on, and the living room filled with the sound of laughter, her laughter. The video I'd recorded of them on the couch, tangled up together, played out in full color for them both to see. I watched their faces as the truth hit them, the shock and horror creeping into their eyes as they realized what I'd done. Linda's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. What is this?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I looked at her, my face calm, controlled, even as my heart raced with satisfaction. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, my voice cold. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? That I'd just sit back and let the two of you destroy everything I built?" Mark was frozen, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled for words. For once, he had nothing to say. Linda tried to step toward me, her hands outstretched. "Please, Ryan, I can explain. It's not what it seems." I cut her off, my voice sharp, unyielding. "Save it, Linda. I don't want to hear it. The lies, the betrayal, this is what you chose. Both of you." The room fell silent, the weight of their guilt suffocating. I let the silence stretch, watching them crumble, savoring the reality of what I'd done. For a long, drawn-out moment, no one moved. Linda's face was ghostly white, and Mark's jaw was tight, his eyes locked on mine as if he were trying to gauge how serious I was. But it didn't matter. The damage was done, and they were both in the grip of it now. Linda looked from me to Mark, her eyes wide with a panic she couldn't hide. "Ryan, please," she began, her voice trembling. "This isn't—" "Save it," I interrupted, raising a hand. "I've heard enough. You think I don't know what's going on? That I didn't see every lie, every time you slipped out, every look you thought I wouldn't notice?" Mark, still pale, tried to interject. "Ryan, man, listen, But I turned to him with an icy calm I didn't know I was capable of. "You don't get to speak. Not anymore." I took a step toward him, keeping my voice steady and even. "You were my brother. I would have done anything for you. And this is what you give me in return?" Mark's face went blank, his usual arrogance completely gone, replaced by something closer to fear. Good, I thought. It was about time he understood the depth of what he'd done. I turned my gaze back to Linda, watching as she reached out toward me, pleading. "Ryan, please, let's talk about this. We can work this out. I made a mistake, yes, but it doesn't have to be the end of us." I laughed, cold and humorless, the sound filling the room. "The end of us? That happened the moment you chose him. Do you honestly think there's anything left to save?" She looked down, a tear slipping down her cheek, but I didn't feel any sympathy. I was done with sympathy, done with forgiveness. I wanted more than that. I wanted them to feel every ounce of the betrayal they'd given me, to understand the cost of what they'd done. I paused, considering my next words carefully. "You think this is it? Just a few tears and a half-hearted apology, and we're done here?" I shook my head, feeling a grim satisfaction in watching them squirm. "No. We're only just getting started." Mark opened his mouth as if to protest, but I silenced him with a look. "Tomorrow, you're both going to feel the consequences of what you've done. You think you can ruin my life and walk away unscathed? Think again." I turned to leave, heading for the front door, feeling their eyes on me. As I reached the door, I paused and looked back over my shoulder, my voice low and filled with a cold rage. "Oh, and Linda? I've already spoken to my lawyer. You might want to do the same." The color drained from her face as I walked out, leaving them both standing there, stunned and silent. The night air felt like a slap to the face, clearing my head as I stepped outside, but I didn't stop to take it in. I kept walking, knowing exactly where I was going, what I needed to do next. The next day, I made good on my promise. I wasn't interested in a quick, clean break. No, I wanted this to be painful, to drag out every last ounce of betrayal and make them understand just how deeply they'd hurt me. I went to the bank first, putting a hold on all our joint accounts and freezing the credit cards. I'd worked too hard to let them live off my money while they played house. Then I made another call, to the realtor. We were going to sell the house, whether Linda wanted to or not. Afterward, I met with my lawyer, laying out everything I'd gathered, every piece of evidence, every detail of their affair. He listened intently, nodding along as I explained what I wanted: a divorce, full ownership of our assets, and most importantly, a clear line in the sand that neither Linda nor Mark could cross. "Are you sure you want to do this?" my lawyer asked, his brow furrowed as he glanced through the paperwork. "Absolutely," I replied, my voice steady. "I want everything laid out. No room for error." He nodded, understanding. "I'll draft the papers immediately. This will be messy, Ryan. Messier than most cases I've seen. But if you're sure, I'll get started right away." The thought of Linda's face when she saw the divorce papers, the financial restrictions, the complete unraveling of everything she thought she'd get away with, it was enough to make me feel a flicker of satisfaction, a grim sense of justice. I'd taken back control. And from here on out, I was going to call the shots. That night, I didn't go back home. Instead, I stayed at a hotel, needing the distance, needing to know I wouldn't wake up next to her, wouldn't see any reminders of the life we'd shared. As I sat in that small, anonymous room, the events of the past day replayed in my mind. I'd done what needed to be done, but the anger was still there, simmering just below the surface. Unable to sleep, I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my photos, finding the video I'd recorded of them in my living room. I watched it again, the laughter, the stolen glances, the intimacy they thought was hidden from me. Every second of it fueled my resolve. I started planning my next steps, considering every option, every possible way I could expose them. I thought about our friends, our family, the people who'd always seen us as the perfect couple. How would they react when they learned the truth? How would Linda explain herself, justify her actions? The next morning, I went back to the house. Linda was there, waiting, her face pale and drawn as she opened the door. "Ryan," she said softly, her voice thick with remorse. "Please, we need to talk." I stepped inside, but I didn't sit down, didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me hurt or broken. "What's there to talk about?" I asked, my voice calm and measured. "You made your choices, and now you're going to live with the consequences." She reached out, her hand trembling. "I was wrong, Ryan. I know that now. But please, just listen to me. Let me explain." I looked down at her hand, then met her gaze, my voice cold. "You don't get to explain, Linda. This is over." "But Ryan, please!" she cried, her voice breaking as she struggled to hold back tears. "I love you. I made a mistake, yes, but I still love you." I shook my head slowly, stepping back. "You don't know what love is. Love isn't betrayal. Love isn't sneaking around with my own brother." I let the words sink in, watching as her face crumpled, as the realization hit her that there was no going back. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the empty house. Over the next few days, I kept my distance. I moved into a temporary apartment, leaving Linda to face the reality of the situation. My lawyer handled most of the proceedings, keeping me updated as things progressed. I learned from him that Linda was trying to fight for the house, for a portion of our joint savings, but I'd made sure she wouldn't get a dime more than she deserved. And as for Mark? I heard through the grapevine that he'd taken a leave of absence from work, too ashamed to show his face. I thought that would be the end of it, that they'd quietly disappear from my life, each taking their punishment in silence. But then, a few days later, I got a call from my mother. "Ryan," she began, her voice tight with worry. "Is it true? What happened with Linda and Mark?" My chest tightened. They'd heard. I'd wanted to keep things quiet, at least with family, but it looked like the news had spread faster than I'd anticipated. "Yeah, Mom," I replied, my voice heavy. "It's true." There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to say. How could they? Mark, your brother. How could he do this?" Her pain was clear, cutting through me like a knife. My mother adored both Linda and Mark, had always seen them as part of our family. And now they'd destroyed not just my marriage, but the bonds of our family as well. My mother's voice cracked over the phone as she tried to wrap her mind around what I'd told her. I could hear her heartbreak, the disbelief mixed with anger and sorrow. Mark was her son too, after all, and the betrayal hit her almost as hard as it had hit me. "How could this happen, Ryan? How could he do this to you, to us?" she whispered. "I don't know, Mom," I replied, feeling the weight of her pain pressing down on me. "But there's no going back now." After I hung up, I knew that this revelation would ripple through the family, through our friends, through every corner of the life we built. And while part of me dreaded it, there was a darker part that found some satisfaction in knowing Linda and Mark's betrayal would be laid bare for everyone to see. They wouldn't be able to hide from the consequences, not with everything exposed. I went about my day, checking in with my lawyer, making arrangements to move my belongings out of the house. But the anger never left me. It simmered beneath the surface, as though daring me to act, pushing me to go further. A clean break wasn't enough. I needed to make sure they felt the full impact of what they'd done. That evening, I decided it was time to confront Mark directly. Up until then, I'd only spoken to him that one time at dinner, and the silence between us was suffocating. I needed to look him in the eyes, to make sure he understood what he'd done. So, I drove to his apartment, not bothering to call ahead. When I arrived, I knocked hard on the door. After a few moments, I heard him shuffling on the other side, and then the door opened to reveal a version of Mark I barely recognized. He looked rough, unkempt, with dark circles under his eyes. But I couldn't bring myself to feel any pity. This was the face of a man who had betrayed his own brother, and I wanted him to feel every ounce of the anger I'd bottled up. "Ryan," he began, his voice weak, eyes searching mine. "Look, I know you don't want to hear it, but I'm sorry." "Sorry?" I echoed, my voice hard. I took a step closer, and he backed up, letting me into his apartment, where the smell of stale beer and something burnt hung in the air. "You're sorry? Do you have any idea what you've done?" Mark lowered his head, his shoulders slumping as if he'd been carrying the weight of this betrayal for far longer than I knew. "I didn't mean for it to happen, man. It just got out of hand." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that filled the room. "Got out of hand? You think that makes it better?" I shook my head, stepping closer until we were face to face. "You ruined my marriage. You destroyed our family. And for what, Mark? A cheap thrill?" He looked away, unable to meet my gaze, and that only made me angrier. He couldn't even look me in the eyes as he confessed. "It wasn't like that," he muttered. "Linda and we just... I don't know, man. I didn't plan it. It just happened." The excuses were hollow, empty, and I felt my patience snap. "You didn't plan it? You didn't plan it? Mark, you lied to me for months. You came into my house, slept with my wife, and smiled in my face like nothing was wrong. And now you're saying it just happened? That you didn't mean it?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off, my voice low and cold. "You're a coward. You always have been. But I never thought you'd stoop this low. Never thought you'd betray your own brother." He flinched, and for a second, I saw a flash of something in his eyes, shame, guilt, maybe even regret. But it wasn't enough. Nothing he could say or do would ever be enough to make up for what he'd done. "Ryan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know how to fix this. I know I messed up, okay? But please, don't destroy everything. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I stared at him, my jaw clenched. He wanted mercy? After everything he'd done? The thought made my blood boil, and I stepped back, shaking my head in disbelief. "You know what, Mark?" I said, my voice calm but seething with rage. "You don't get to ask me for anything. Not now, not ever. You made your choice, and now you're going to live with the consequences." Without another word, I turned and left, leaving him standing in his dingy apartment, his eyes filled with the weight of his own guilt. That night, I went back to the house to gather my things. I was prepared to pack quickly, to get in and out without a word to Linda. But as soon as I walked through the door, she was there, standing in the hallway as if she'd been waiting for me. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, and for a brief moment, I almost felt a pang of pity. Almost. "Ryan," she began, her voice trembling. "Please, can we talk? Just for a few minutes?" I ignored her, walking past her and heading upstairs to our bedroom, where I'd stashed the essentials I planned to take with me. But she followed, hovering in the doorway as I packed, her presence heavy and suffocating. "Ryan, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "I know I hurt you. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I just need you to understand." I turned to her, the anger flaring up again. "Understand? You want me to understand why you betrayed me? Why you chose my brother over the life we built together?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It wasn't about him. I don't even know why it happened. I was lonely. You were always gone, and I made a mistake, Ryan. A terrible mistake. That's all it was to you?" I asked, my voice harsh. "A mistake?" She stepped forward, reaching out, but I pulled back. "Yes, a mistake. One I'll regret for the rest of my life. But please, Ryan, don't end this like this. Don't just walk away." I paused, taking a deep breath to keep myself from losing control. I'm not the one walking away, Linda. You already did that. The second you let him into our bed, you left me. So don't stand here now and pretend that you want to fix this. Her face crumpled, her shoulders shaking as she tried to hold back her sobs. But I couldn't bring myself to care. Not anymore. I'd spent enough time pretending, enough time living a lie. It was over. I grabbed my bags and pushed past her, heading down the stairs. But before I reached the door, I stopped and turned, giving her one last look. You made your choice, Linda. Now live with it. And with that, I walked out, leaving her standing alone in the empty hallway, her sobs echoing through the house that was no longer a home. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding, putting distance between myself and the ruins of my old life. The divorce proceedings moved quickly, and though Linda tried to fight it, she soon realized she had no leverage. I'd left her with nothing, stripping away every last piece of the life we built together. Word got out, of course. Friends, family, acquaintances, everyone heard the story, everyone knew the details. Mark was ostracized, his once tight circle of friends turning their backs on him, disgusted by his betrayal. Linda tried to salvage her reputation, tried to downplay what had happened, but the damage was done. Everywhere she went, people whispered, people stared. The perfect wife, the loving spouse, those images were shattered, replaced by the ugly truth of what she'd done. And me? I found a new place, a new start, somewhere far enough from the memories that haunted me. I threw myself into work, into new projects, anything to keep my mind busy. But late at night, when the world was quiet, I'd think back to those last moments, the look on her face when she realized the life she'd thrown away, the emptiness that had taken its place. Some nights, I felt the urge to reach out, to ask her why, to get the answers that had always eluded me. But then I'd remember the lies, the betrayal, and the anger would come rushing back, drowning out any trace of doubt. In the end, I knew there was no going back. The life I'd once had, the people I'd trusted, the love I'd believed in, it was gone, buried beneath the ashes of a betrayal too deep to forgive. Months passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the life I'd worked so hard to build had been dismantled, piece by piece, right in front of me. Linda and Mark's betrayal wasn't something I could just move on from, it had become a part of me, a shadow trailing every decision, every thought. I'd cut them off completely, refused to answer their calls, ignored the few messages they tried to send in the weeks following the divorce. As far as I was concerned, they no longer existed. But one evening, while I was in the middle of packing up the last few boxes from our old house, my phone buzzed. I glanced down, expecting it to be my lawyer with one final update on the proceedings, but the caller ID stopped me cold. It was Linda's mother. My finger hovered over the screen. I hadn't spoken to her since everything had blown up, hadn't wanted to bring her into the mess Linda had created. But as I stood there, her name glowing on the screen, something in me hesitated. With a resigned sigh, I accepted the call. Hello? There was a long pause on the other end before her voice came through, soft but steady. Ryan. It's good to hear your voice. I forced myself to keep calm. Hello, Mrs. Kendall. How are you? She exhaled, and I could almost feel the weight of her sadness through the line. I don't know, Ryan. I honestly don't know. I've been trying to make sense of everything, trying to understand what went wrong. I stayed silent, letting her talk. Linda's mother had always been kind to me, treated me like her own son, and the thought of what this mess must have done to her brought an unexpected wave of guilt. She told me everything, Ryan, she continued, her voice thick with emotion. About what she did, about Mark. She struggled over the last word, as if it hurt her just to say it. I'm sorry, I replied, my voice flat. I wish I had answers for you, but I don't. I just wanted you to know, Ryan, that none of this was your fault. Linda, she's been struggling, but that doesn't excuse what she did. I told her as much, but I also told her she'll have to live with the consequences. She's lost you, and I don't think she'll ever understand what that truly means. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. Well, she made her choice. Yes, she replied quietly, almost a whisper. And she'll regret it for the rest of her life. There was silence between us, heavy and thick, the weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air. Finally she spoke again, her voice gentle, almost pleading. I know it's too much to ask, but if you could find it in your heart to forgive her, maybe you'd be able to find some peace, Ryan. Maybe it would help you move forward. The words stung, cutting deeper than I'd expected. Forgive her? How could I forgive someone who had ripped my life apart, someone who'd torn apart not only my trust but the foundation of everything I'd ever believed in? But as I stood there, her mother's voice lingering in my ear, I realized that maybe forgiveness wasn't for Linda's sake. Maybe it was for mine. I'll think about it, I said finally, unable to commit to anything more. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty walls of the house that had once been filled with laughter, love, and warmth. Now, it was nothing but a hollow shell, a place I wanted to leave behind as quickly as possible. In the weeks that followed, I focused on moving forward, forcing myself to let go of the anger, the resentment, everything that had kept me tied to the past. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had closed every door, cut every tie, yet a part of me still felt bound to the memory of what Linda and Mark had done. Then, one day, I received an unexpected email. It was from Mark. Just seeing his name made my stomach churn, but curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The message was short, almost terse, as if he'd struggled to find the words. Ryan, I know I have no right to reach out to you after everything I've done, but there's something I need you to know. I messed up, and I'll spend the rest of my life paying for it. I lost you, I lost our family, and honestly, I've lost myself. But I can't move on without trying to make things right. I don't expect you to forgive me, but please, if you can, just hear me out one last time. Mark. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to delete it, to ignore his plea, to let him suffer in the silence he'd earned. But there was another part of me that wanted answers. Answers that only he could give. Against my better judgment, I replied, agreeing to meet. A few days later, we met in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Mark looked worse than I'd ever seen him, gaunt, his eyes hollow, his shoulders slumped as if he carried the weight of the world on them. As he walked over to me, I felt a strange mix of anger and pity. This man had been my brother, my friend, and now he was nothing more than a stranger. We sat in silence for a few moments, either of us knowing where to begin. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Ryan, I don't even know where to start. I know I've lost you, and I know I'll never be able to make up for what I did, but I need you to understand. I'm sorry. More than you'll ever know. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. You think an apology makes this right? You think you can just say I'm sorry and undo everything you destroyed? He winced, his face filled with remorse. No. I know I can't. But I need you to know, it was never about hurting you. I was lost, Ryan. I don't even recognize the person I became. I shook my head, my hands clenching into fists. You weren't just lost, Mark. You were selfish. You took everything from me, from us, and for what? A fling? A thrill? He looked down, his hands trembling. I don't have an excuse, Ryan. I wish I did, but I don't. I thought I could keep it separate, that you'd never find out, and that no one would get hurt. I laughed bitterly. Well, you were wrong. And now you're paying for it. He nodded, his eyes filled with a sadness that felt almost too raw to be fake. I know. I've lost everything, my friends, my family, my self-respect. And honestly, I don't think I deserve to have any of it back. For a moment, we sat there in silence, the weight of everything we'd once shared hanging between us. And as I looked at him, I realized that he was broken, a shell of the person he'd once been. Maybe he really was sorry. Maybe he'd come to understand the depth of his betrayal. But forgiveness? That was something I didn't know if I could ever give him. Ryan, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I know you can't forgive me. I know I don't deserve it. But I wanted to tell you, face to face, that I'm sorry. And if there's anything I can do to make this right, anything at all, please let me know. I leaned back, studying him. Part of me wanted to tell him to go to hell, to walk away and let him live in the hell he'd created. But another part, the part that had once loved him as my brother, wanted to believe he could change, that he could find a way to make amends. Honestly, Mark, I said finally, my voice cold, I don't know if there's anything you can do. But maybe if you can live with what you've done, you'll finally understand the cost of betrayal. He nodded, his face crumpling as he struggled to hold back tears. Thank you, Ryan, for hearing me out. That's more than I deserve. We sat there for a few more moments, the silence between us filled with the weight of everything we'd lost. And as I got up to leave, I felt a strange sense of closure, a release from the anger that had consumed me for so long. As I walked away from that cafe, I knew I'd never see him again. But for the first time, I felt free from the past, free from the pain, and ready to start over. I left that cafe with a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. Somehow, facing Mark had helped me let go of the last remnants of anger and pain that had clung to me, weighing down every day since the betrayal. But even though I felt lighter, it didn't erase everything. The betrayal had scarred me, left me questioning every part of myself, every instinct that had once guided me. I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to fully trust again, but I was finally ready to try. Over the next few weeks, I focused on building a new life for myself. I found a small but comfortable apartment in a part of town I'd never really explored before. It wasn't the home I'd once shared with Linda, but that was part of its appeal. It was a fresh start, a blank slate where I could begin to carve out an existence that was mine and mine alone. I also threw myself into my work with a newfound intensity. The long hours and projects kept me busy, and for the first time in a while, I started to feel a sense of purpose beyond the pain. My coworkers noticed the change, and a few even asked me out for drinks after work. At first, I turned them down, not ready to dive back into any kind of social life. But eventually, I started to accept, allowing myself to connect with people in small, careful ways. It was during one of those nights out that I met Julia. She was a new hire in the marketing department, recently relocated to the area, and as soon as she introduced herself, I felt a spark I hadn't expected. Julia was different, calm, collected, with a warmth that put me at ease. She wasn't forceful or pushy, just genuinely curious about who I was, asking questions without prying, and sharing bits of her own life with a candor that felt rare. The first few times we went out with the group, I kept my distance, wary of getting too close. But over time, we began to talk more, sharing stories about work, our interests, the places we traveled. She had an easygoing way of talking, a lightness that made me feel like I could finally breathe again. One evening, as the group began to break off, she stayed behind, lingering as if she wanted to ask me something. Finally, she took a breath, her eyes serious but kind. "Ryan, I know we don't know each other well, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here. Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone." Her words caught me off guard, hitting deeper than I'd expected. I hadn't told her anything about Linda, about Mark, or the betrayal, yet somehow she seemed to sense that I was holding back, that there was a part of me still hidden, still hurting. "Thank you, Julia," I said quietly, meaning it. "I might take you up on that." And for the first time, I felt like maybe I could. A few weeks later, Julia and I were still getting to know each other, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations. I hadn't expected to feel this way again, to feel interested, engaged, even excited to see someone. But Julia had a way of bringing out parts of me I thought were gone, buried beneath the hurt and resentment. One Friday evening, after work, we decided to grab dinner, just the two of us. We talked about everything: her family back home, the new projects she was working on, her plans to travel once her work allowed it. And before I realized it, I found myself opening up, sharing details about my own family, my past, and finally, the truth about Linda and Mark. She listened quietly, never interrupting, her expression thoughtful as I laid everything out: the betrayal, the anger, the steps I'd taken to rebuild myself from the ground up. When I finished, she reached across the table, her hand covering mine. "You're stronger than you think, Ryan. Most people would never have been able to move on the way you have." Her words soothed something deep inside me, a part of me that had always questioned whether I could ever really let go. Julia's presence felt steady and grounding, like something I could lean on, something solid after months of uncertainty. From that night on, we grew closer. We started spending weekends together, exploring the city, trying out new restaurants, or simply relaxing, enjoying each other's company without any expectations. With her, things felt natural, effortless. There was no pressure, no baggage, just two people finding comfort in each other's presence. One evening, as we sat on her balcony watching the sun set, Julia turned to me, a gentle smile on her face. "Ryan, have you ever thought about forgiving them?" she asked, her tone cautious, as if she didn't want to push me too far. I tensed at the question, the old anger flaring up momentarily, but I took a deep breath, considering her words. Forgiveness wasn't something I'd really thought about. I'd moved on, yes, but I hadn't forgiven them. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. Julia seemed to sense my hesitation, and she gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what they did. It's more for you than for them. It's about letting go of the anger, so it doesn't keep holding you back." Her words stayed with me long after that evening, lingering in my mind as I went about my life. I didn't want to forgive them, but I could see the truth in what she'd said. The anger had weighed on me for so long, consuming every part of my life, and maybe it was time to let it go. Over the next few days, I thought about what forgiveness might look like. I didn't need to reach out to them, didn't need to tell them that I forgave them. It could be something quiet, something for myself, a way to finally put everything to rest. One evening, I sat down with a pen and a piece of paper, and I wrote out everything I wanted to say to them. I poured out every ounce of anger, every question, every regret. I wrote about the pain they'd caused, the life they'd taken from me, and the long, lonely road I'd had to walk because of their choices. And when I'd said everything I needed to say, I folded the paper and put it in a drawer. I didn't need to send it. Just writing it down felt like a release, a way to finally let go of the anger that had been my constant companion. As time passed, my relationship with Julia deepened, and I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't thought possible. She'd become more than just a friend, more than a source of comfort. She was a partner, someone who stood beside me as I rebuilt my life, piece by piece. One evening, as we sat in my apartment, she turned to me, her eyes filled with a warmth that took my breath away. "Ryan," she said softly, her voice steady, "I don't know where this is going, but I want you to know I'm here for as long as you want me to be." The words filled me with a quiet sense of peace, a certainty I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know if I was ready to fully let someone back into my life. But with Julia, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could try. In the end, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about Linda or Mark. It was about me, about choosing to live without the weight of the past, about letting myself be free to build a future unburdened by betrayal. And as Julia leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder, I knew that for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace that future, one step at a time, with her by my side. With Julia by my side, life finally began to feel like something I could look forward to. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed me had dulled to a quiet ache, something I could acknowledge and move on from. But then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was from Linda. "Ryan, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, and I don't blame you. But I need to talk. Not about us or what happened, about something that's been weighing on me. I don't expect anything from you, but please, meet with me. Just once." I stared at the message, a mix of emotions welling up inside me. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to delete it, and let Linda remain a closed chapter in my life. But another part, a part one hadn't acknowledged until now, felt like there were still things left unsaid, unfinished. Perhaps meeting her would finally bring closure to a part of my life that had never fully healed. After thinking it over, I decided to respond, agreeing to meet. We arranged to meet at a small, quiet cafe on the edge of town, a place I'd never been to before. When I arrived, Linda was already there, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked different, thinner, her face drawn with worry. The sight of her brought back a flood of memories, both good and bad, and for a moment, I almost turned around and walked out. But I steadied myself, took a deep breath, and walked over to join her. "Hi, Ryan," she said softly, looking up at me with tired eyes. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral as I sat across from her. "What do you need, Linda?" She looked down, fidgeting with her coffee cup, as if trying to find the right words. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to tell you. I'm sorry. For everything. I know that doesn't fix anything, and it doesn't take away the pain I caused. But I needed you to know that I regret it. Every single day. I felt a pang of something, maybe pity, maybe the remnants of an old love I thought had died. But I kept my voice steady. You've already said you're sorry, Linda. What's this really about?" She took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she placed them on the table. "I know you've moved on, and that's good. You deserve to be happy, Ryan. But I can't shake the guilt, the weight of what I did. It's been eating me alive. I keep thinking, if I could just make amends, maybe I could find some peace." I watched her for a moment, trying to gauge her sincerity. She looked genuinely remorseful, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading. But I couldn't let myself be drawn in by her sadness. "Linda," I said slowly, my voice calm but firm, "I've already forgiven you. But that forgiveness wasn't for you, it was for me. I forgave you so I could move on with my life, not because I thought it would bring you peace." She looked down, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me for my sake. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. That I'm trying to understand why I did what I did. And if I could go back and change things, I would." A silence stretched between us, heavy with all the things left unsaid. Finally, I leaned forward, my voice soft but resolute. "Linda, I hope you do find peace. I hope you can forgive yourself. But you need to understand, your choices affected more than just you. You didn't just hurt me, you tore apart a family, friendships, everything we built. And there are some things that can't be undone." She nodded, her eyes downcast, accepting my words like a final verdict. "I know. And I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life." We sat there in silence, the past hanging between us like a ghost. For the first time, I realized that I didn't feel anger or resentment. I felt free. Linda was no longer the woman I'd loved, no longer the person who had hurt me. She was just someone who had made mistakes, mistakes that had cost us both dearly. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Linda," I said finally, standing up to leave. "But this is goodbye. For good." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret and gratitude. "Thank you, Ryan. For everything." As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure settle over me. I'd said everything I needed to say, and for the first time, I felt truly ready to move on. When I got home that night, Julia was waiting for me, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding as I walked through the door. She must have seen the look on my face, sensed the weight that had lifted from my shoulders, because she didn't say a word. She just walked over and wrapped her arms around me, holding me close. We stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's embrace, the warmth of her presence a balm to the scars Linda had left behind. I knew in that moment that I'd made the right choice, that Julia was the future I'd been searching for. Over the next few weeks, my relationship with Julia grew stronger, deepening in ways I hadn't thought possible. She became my confidant, my partner, the person who helped me see beyond the pain and into a future I could finally believe in. With her, there was no doubt, no fear, just a quiet certainty that we were building something real, something lasting. One evening, as we sat on her balcony watching the stars, she turned to me, her eyes shining in the soft glow of the city lights. "Ryan," she said softly, "I know you've been through so much. But I want you to know, I'm here. For whatever comes next, I'm here." The words touched something deep inside me, a part of me that had once feared love, that had doubted I could ever trust again. But as I looked at her, I realized that I was ready to take that leap, ready to let go of the past and embrace the future. "I'm here too," I replied, my voice steady. "And I'm ready to move forward. With you." She smiled, leaning into me, her head resting on my shoulder as we sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the past finally slipping away. Months turned into years, and Julia and I built a life together, a life filled with laughter, love, and the kind of trust I'd once thought was lost forever. We traveled, explored new places, met new friends, and slowly, my memories of Linda and Mark faded into the background. They became shadows, faint reminders of a time I'd left behind. I still thought about them sometimes, wondered if they'd found peace, if they'd managed to rebuild their own lives. But those thoughts were fleeting, no longer tinged with anger or resentment. They were just memories, pieces of a story that no longer defined me. One evening, as Julia and I sat down to dinner, she reached across the table, her eyes filled with a quiet joy. "Ryan, I have something to tell you," she said, a hint of excitement in her voice. I looked at her, my heart pounding with anticipation. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, a smile spreading across her face. "We're going to have a baby." The words hit me like a wave, filling me with a joy I hadn't known I was capable of feeling. I reached across the table, taking her hands in mine, my heart swelling with a love that felt infinite. In that moment, I realized that the life I'd once lost was nothing compared to the life I was building now. Julia and I were creating something new, something untouched by the pain of the past. And as I looked into her eyes, I knew that I was finally, truly free. The past was behind me, a distant memory, and all that lay ahead was a future I could finally believe in. The news of Julia's pregnancy brought a wave of emotions I could barely process. For so long, I'd been rebuilding my life piece by piece, focused on healing and finding peace, but I'd never imagined starting a family again. I'd locked away that part of myself, believing it was something I'd lost along with everything else. But as I held Julia's hand, feeling her warmth, her excitement, I realized that this wasn't just about healing anymore. This was about building something beautiful, something worth holding on to. Julia saw the look in my eyes and smiled, her joy radiant, contagious. "Are you happy, Ryan?" she asked, her voice gentle, searching. "Happy doesn't even cover it," I replied, laughing softly. "This is everything I didn't know I wanted." We spent the evening talking about the future, about names and nurseries and the kind of life we wanted for our child. Julia's dreams were filled with love, hope, and everything I'd come to cherish about her. She wanted a home filled with warmth, laughter, and moments of togetherness. And as I listened to her, I realized that I wanted that too, more than anything. But with this new beginning came new fears. The memory of Linda and Mark, though faded, still lingered at the edges of my mind. The scars from that betrayal had taught me caution, left me wondering if love, trust, and family were fragile illusions that could shatter at any moment. I felt an ache of worry, a quiet fear that whispered, what if something went wrong again? Julia seemed to sense my hesitation. She reached over, her fingers brushing my cheek, her gaze steady. "Ryan," she said softly, "we're in this together. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens, we'll face it side by side." Her words grounded me, reminded me that this wasn't the past. Julia wasn't Linda, and I wasn't the broken man who had walked out of that marriage. I was different now, stronger, wiser, more resilient. This time, I wasn't putting my faith in illusions. I was building something real, something rooted in love and mutual respect. In the days that followed, Julia and I dove into preparations. We painted a spare room in soft shades of blue and yellow, filling it with small, thoughtful touches, a rocking chair, framed family photos, a quilt Julia had made by hand. Each item felt like a promise, a pledge of the life we were creating together. Our friends rallied around us, bringing gifts and well wishes, their excitement infectious. Julia's family embraced me fully, treating me as one of their own, their warmth and kindness helping me feel at home in ways I hadn't felt in years. With every passing day, my doubts faded, replaced by a deep, abiding joy I hadn't known was possible. And one evening, as we finished setting up the nursery, Julia turned to me, her eyes filled with happy tears. "This is it, Ryan," she whispered, taking my hand. "This is our family." In that moment, I realized that she was right. I didn't need to question it, didn't need to overthink. All I needed to do was be present, to let myself love her, love our child, and embrace this new life we built. I was finally ready for it, ready to let go of the past, once and for all. The months flew by, each day filled with preparations and quiet moments of anticipation. Julia and I grew closer with every new milestone, every doctor's appointment, every shared dream about the life we were building. For the first time in years, I felt a true sense of peace, a calm that had nothing to do with healing and everything to do with simply living. I was no longer just moving on, I was moving forward. Then, one evening, as we were watching a movie on the couch, Julia suddenly took my hand, her face lighting up with a mix of awe and excitement. "Ryan," she whispered, placing my hand on her stomach. "Feel that?" I froze, my breath catching as I felt a small, distinct movement, a gentle kick. Our baby. A real, undeniable reminder of the new life growing inside her. Tears sprang to my eyes, and I pulled Julia close, overwhelmed by a feeling of love that was as deep as it was unexpected. In that moment, I realized that this child was more than just a fresh start. They were a symbol of everything Julia and I had built, a future born not from pain or loss but from love and hope. I kissed Julia's forehead, my heart full to the point of bursting. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for bringing me back to life." In the final weeks of her pregnancy, Julia and I found ourselves surrounded by a sense of calm anticipation. The nursery was ready, filled with every small detail we'd poured our love into. Our friends and family checked in regularly, eager to help in any way they could. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting alongside us for the arrival of this new little life. Then, early one morning, the moment finally came. Julia shook me awake, her face pale but determined. "It's time, Ryan," she said, her voice calm but urgent. I sprang out of bed, my heart racing as I grabbed the hospital bag we'd packed weeks ago and helped her to the car. The drive felt both endless and lightning fast, every second heightened by the knowledge that our child would soon be here. In the delivery room, I held Julia's hand, whispering words of encouragement, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and awe. She was strong, fierce, and beautiful, her determination and love shining through even in the midst of the pain. And finally, after hours of waiting and watching, our baby entered the world, filling the room with a small, powerful cry that seemed to echo through every corner of my heart. A nurse placed our baby, a girl, in Julia's arms, and as I looked down at them, I felt a profound, overwhelming love that I knew would stay with me for the rest of my life. Julia looked up at me, her face glowing with exhaustion and joy, and handed our daughter to me. "Meet her, Ryan," she whispered, her eyes filled with tears. "She's yours." I held my daughter, marveling at her tiny features, her soft, warm skin, the way her fingers curled instinctively around my thumb. She was perfect, a tiny miracle who had brought me full circle, closing the chapter of pain and opening a new one of hope and joy. As I looked at Julia and our daughter, I knew that everything I'd gone through, every heartbreak, every challenge, every painful lesson, had led me to this moment. I'd found a new beginning, a new purpose, and a new kind of love that would guide me for the rest of my life. Together, we were a family. A real family, built on trust, love, and resilience. And as I held my daughter close, I made a silent promise, to be the man she deserved, to give her the life she deserved, and to always protect the love we had built, no matter what. The past was finally, truly behind me. And the future, bright and full of promise, stretched out before us. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, hit like and leave a comment with your favorite part. We'd love to hear your perspective.